Are we live
All
yet?
right. Yep, go ahead.
All right. Good morning and welcome. On behalf of the Seattle Planning Commission, I'd like to humbly recognize that we are gathered on Indigenous land, the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples. We thank these caretakers of this land who have lived and continue to live here since time immemorial. We acknowledge the role that traditional Western-centric planning practices have played in harming, displacing, and attempting to erase Native communities, and we respect Indigenous rights to sovereignty and self-determination. We commit to being better listeners, learners, and to lifting Indigenous voices. We also commit to identifying racist practices, to practice allyship, and strive to center restorative land stewardship rather than unsustainable and extractive use of the land. Welcome to all members of the public and visitors. Vanessa, do we have any members of the public here today or listening in?
We have one person listening in, and it's just commission staff in the boards and commissions room in City Hall.
Okay. Well, welcome to those who are listening in today. We're happy to make all commission meetings open to the public. Please note that the Planning Commission does not hold public hearings since we are an advisory body. We provide recommendations to elected leaders that in turn make the actual decisions. And we encourage individuals and organizations to provide their comments appropriately to elected officials. Obviously, this meeting is a hybrid meeting with some individuals participating remotely, while others are participating in person at the boards and commissions room at City Hall. In advance of today's meeting, I invited Rose to speak to one of our color-based space norms that they feel have particular relevance to today's agenda. So Rose, if you want to go ahead and pick one.
Yep, morning. I was torn between put relationships first and keep focused on our collective goal. And the reason for that is I feel like transportation systems, they should be influenced by community, which is something we've long advocated. And then also transportations are part of how we get around to create community. And so our work with the transportation plan and our work with the EIS process is all really relevant for that relationship building community. And at the same time, keeping in mind our collective goal of creating racial justice through Black liberation and Native sovereignty. And because the Seattle Transportation Plan doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's an opportunity to examine past wrongs and do our best to right them and do what we can to make the Seattle Transportation better. Okay.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you very much. We're trying to put into practice giving somebody a little bit of advance notice, and that was a really thoughtful interweaving of some of the color brave space norms into today's agenda items. So as Rose previewed, we have two agenda items today, both of which are related to the Seattle Transportation Plan. Planning Commission staff will walk through their draft comment letter for us on the draft plan, and then walk through the draft comment letter on the Seattle Transportation Plan draft environmental impact statement. But before we do that, we are going to approve the meeting minutes. Sorry, I thought maybe I had missed introductions, but we do introductions later. So first we're going to approve we need to approve the September 14th, 2023 meeting minutes. Can I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
David will so move.
Jamie seconds.
All right. Does anybody have any changes or amendments? With that, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? With that, the September 14th, 2023 meeting minutes are approved. A few announcements. The next Housing and Neighborhoods Committee meeting is next Thursday, October 5th from 7:30 to 9 a.m. The meeting will be held online using the MS Teams platform. On our next full commission meeting is scheduled for Thursday, October 12th from 3 to 5:30 p.m. And that meeting will be held both in person and over Teams. And Vanessa, I'll pass it over to you for some announcements and commission business.
Thanks, Michaela. Just a reminder to those listening in, as well as commissioners, this morning's meeting is pretty much 100% remote, as all commissioners joining the meeting are doing so via the MS Teams platform, and commission staff is here in the boards and commissions room. I'd like to remind commissioners to put their name in the chat function of Teams when you would like to be recognized by the chair to either ask a question or make a comment. And a reminder to please don't put anything substantive in the chat, as the chat is not available to members of the public listening in. It's fine to put a resource in the chat, and then we will include that, such as a web link, or usually it's a web link. And then we will put that in the minutes, and that will be part of the public record of this meeting. So we do have an opportunity for public comment this morning, both before we start our conversations and then at the end of the meeting. And I have not received any emails from any individual requesting to make public comment. There's a chance that somebody could show up, but I will let you know, Michaela, if that occurs. And with that, I'll ask Michaela to start the introductions, and we'll conclude with introducing the staff.
All right. Good morning, Michaela Daffern. I co-chair the Planning Commission. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Capitol Hill, and I work in affordable housing policy and planning. I'll turn it over to David.
Good morning. Sorry for my slow button pressing. David Goldberg, he, him pronouns. I live in the Wallingford Urban Village, co-chair with Michaela of the commission. And I will pass it to Jamie.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jamie Strobel. I use she, her pronouns. I work in climate change and environmental justice, and I live in the future 130th station area. And I will pass to Rose.
Hey all, Rose Lucello, what's in pronouns they, them. I live up north in Licton Springs, and I work as a wetland biologist and permitting specialist for Jacobs Engineering. Pass it to Tiana.
Good morning, Diana Quintanar. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Capitol Hill, and for my day job, I'm a multimodal transportation planner. I'll pass it over to Nick.
Good morning, Nick Whipple. I use he, him pronouns. I live in West Seattle in the North Del Ridge neighborhood. And for my day job, I am a city planner over in Bellevue. And I think I saw Matt on the call. Pass it to Matt.
Good morning. My name is Matt Hutchins. I use he, him pronouns. I'm an architect. I live in West Seattle. Let's see. Andy?
Hi, Andy Dannenberg, he, him, Northeast Seattle, and I teach in public health at the University of Washington. And I can't tell who hasn't gone. Is there someone other than staff? I'm not seeing.
We can move on to staff, Andy. Thank you.
Okay.
Olivia?
Then go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Olivia Baker. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm staff to the commission.
John?
Good morning, everybody. I'm John Hoy, staff to the Planning Commission. I use he, him pronouns.
Robin?
Robin McGonigal. I'm staff to the commission. I use she, they pronouns, and I live on Vashon. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. That concludes our introductions. My name is Vanessa Murdoch. I'm staff to the commission. I use she, her pronouns, and I will turn it back to Michaela.
All right, thank you. With that, we're moving on to our first agenda item. Before turning it over to city staff to walk us through the proposed draft comment letter on the Seattle Transportation Plan, I'd like to invite any fellow commissioners to disclose any work they are or have been involved in on the Seattle Transportation Plan.
This is Jamie. I've been involved in one of the CBO community engagement contracts to support community engagement around the Seattle Transportation Plan.
Thank you, Jamie.
All right. Anybody else? All right, with that, following the presentation today, I will facilitate our discussion by first asking commissioners for any clarifying questions. If you don't have a question, you can pass, and I can circle back to you at the end of the questions portion of our discussion. Following questions, we'll open the floor to comments. Staff will assist in monitoring the queue and ensuring all commissioners have the opportunity to participate in the discussion. We have 35 minutes for this agenda item. And today's discussion will inform revisions to the letter, which we need to approve at the October 12th full commission meeting. And with that, am I introducing Olivia or John?
I'm going to take this portion of the agenda. Thanks, Michaela. Okay, go ahead to the next slide, Olivia. Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to start with an overview of the timeline and a reminder of our schedule for this, where we've been and where we're going really briefly. So 2 weeks ago, I introduced the staff draft comment letter outline for this draft comment letter on the Seattle Transportation Plan. Last week was a busy week. We had discussions at both the Executive Committee and at the Land Use and Transportation Committee. Thank you to everyone who participated in those conversations, and thanks for your input. Today, I will be presenting and discussing actually, it's not the staff draft, it is the draft comment letter. We will be taking input and incorporating suggestions into the revised draft. The last chance to discuss this letter will be at next Thursday's Housing and Neighborhoods Committee. I encourage everyone to attend if you're interested. And then we will need to approve the final draft letter at the next full commission meeting on October 12th. I will go into when to incorporate or when to send comments at the end of my comments. We have about 35 minutes, I think, for this. I just have a series of slides. I want to present an overview of the content at a really high level. I'm going to present my slides, and then we will take 5 minutes for you all to review the draft letter before we have discussion. I did send out the draft letter on Monday. We did not send it out yet this morning, but we could do that. Vanessa will do that. So you'll have it at the top of your inbox, but I'll just go ahead and go through my slides, and then we'll take 5 minutes to review. I'm just going to present a few bullets for each of the sections, just so you can see some of the primary content. There's a lot in this letter. It's a dense letter. It's about 8 total pages. I hope you've all had the chance to review it. So let's just go forward. The sections have changed a little bit since the outline. There was some consolidation, some reorganization. So it flows starting with introductory comments and then overarching comments for the whole plan. There's a very substantive section on integration with the comprehensive plan, then discussion of a recommended prioritization framework, comments on multi-lane arterials, safety and vision zero, climate change and resilience, then access to daily essential needs, a new section on economic development, section on freight mobility, repurposing the right-of-way, anti-displacement, regional coordination, and lastly, minor comments on readability and user experience. Again, I'm just going to have a few highlights of each of the sections, just so you can get a sense of the tone of the letter and some of the primary recommendations. In the overarching comments, the Commission encourages SDOT in their ongoing community engagement to build a racially equitable and socially just transportation system. The draft STP appears to be a compilation of plans rather than an integrated strategy. And we would like to see more explicit goals, performance measures, targets, and a dashboard to track implementation progress. As I mentioned, there's a substantive section close to the top of the letter on integration with the comprehensive plan. We say that coordination between transportation planning and the comprehensive plan should support population and job growth, housing affordability, mobility, access, and public facilities. We recommend the STP is aligned with the final growth strategy selected for the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. And we note that the delayed public release of the draft comprehensive plan has created an unfortunate challenge because it is not known at this point which land use alternative will be selected. More on integration with the comprehensive plan. Integration of the STP with comprehensive plan growth strategy should show how Vision Zero, transit, and zoning make places that are economically viable and very livable. And we are concerned about alignment between the corridors alternative in the upcoming comprehensive plan and how arterials are treated in the STP. The comments for a prioritization framework. We recommend an equity-based prioritization framework focusing on disproportionately impacted, vulnerable, and underserved communities. The Commission strongly supports reprioritization of the right-of-way for active transportation and transit investments over private vehicles. We recommend addressing and facilitating multimodal transportation in underserved, low-income, and BIPOC communities. And the Commission recommends layering in equity to provide a clear picture of what areas are receiving investments. In the section on multi-lane arterials, we recommend that the STP should articulate and illustrate a comprehensive integrated strategy for multi-lane arterials. We have concerns about the negative environmental and health consequences of arterials, especially on adjacent housing. And we recommend that SDOT refer to research on the health implications, equity considerations, and design characteristics of arterials that promote or hinder health. In the section on safety and Vision Zero, we recommend that the STP should include priority projects to meet the urgency of the city's Vision Zero goals. We recommend making Vision Zero a standalone element with a comprehensive strategy, performance measures, and priority projects for getting to zero deaths by 2030. And we recommend addressing equity concerns related to safety in low-income and BIPOC communities. Under the section on climate change and resilience, we say that the STP must include strategies aimed at air quality, emissions, heat island, sea level rise, tree canopy, and green infrastructure. We recommend that the STP uses an equity lens to focus on communities that have been most affected and continue to be vulnerable. And we recommend that SDOT identify policies and projects to mitigate extreme heat across all transportation modes and systems. Under access to daily essential needs, we recommend that the STP prioritize increasing access to daily essential needs, jobs, and recreational opportunities, including strategies for those without access to cars. And we recommend that SDOT partners with OPCD in development and implementation of the 15-minute city concept, in which most daily necessities and services can be accessed by relatively short non-vehicle trips. There's a section on economic development where we recommend that the STP include economic development as a goal. An integrated transportation system can support a thriving economy by providing access to opportunity, easy commutes for workers, and timely delivery of goods and services. And we recommend that SDOT emphasize how the STP can help to build wealth and improve quality of life for those who have been most marginalized and significantly impacted by the current transportation system. Under freight mobility, we recommend that the STP include strategies to integrate freight with other modes and address conflicts with pedestrians and bikes, especially in industrial areas and future light rail station areas. And we recommend that the STP consider corridors for combined freight and transit, as well as strategies that allow for innovation in urban freight mobility. Under repurposing the right-of-way, we encourage repurposing the right-of-way for walkability, people-oriented streets, and community spaces. We note that the People Street section does not reflect the pandemic shift to neighborhood walkability and stay healthy streets. And we recommend that SDOT continue to explore the benefits of additional parking management strategies. Just a few more sections. Under anti-displacement, we recommend that the STP include proactive transportation strategies to prevent and mitigate the impacts of displacement, and say that SDOT should consider ways to prevent displacement through community-specific transportation investments and commit to partnering with other departments focusing on displacement. Under regional coordination, we say that we would like more information on how the STP will align the city's transportation strategies with the Puget Sound Regional Council's Vision 2050 planning framework and targets. We say that successful implementation will depend on consistent coordination and integration with Metro and Sound Transit. We commend SDOT for ongoing coordination with regional transit agencies and encourage continuing coordination. Lastly, we have a few minor comments on readability and user experience. We say that digesting information in this plan is very challenging. Its length is daunting for the public. The file is not searchable and formatting does not contain hyperlinks. We recommend that the STP should include a glossary for the overall document, not each individual plan. And the plan should include more representative photography of existing transportation problems and what needs to change, especially on rainy, snowy, extreme heat, or smoky days. So that's, again, those are just highlights. There's obviously a lot, there's a lot more detail within each of those sections, but those I just wanted to highlight for you to get a sense of the overall content of the letter. I think we'll take 5 minutes for review, and then we'll come back for comments, and we have about we'll have about 15 minutes for discussion. Okay, welcome back, everybody. That was 5 minutes. I hope you had the chance to review the letter if you had not already. I just want to talk about next steps before we get into clarifying questions and discussion. So the next steps, I encourage everybody who wants to provide any edits to the draft letter. I would encourage you all to please send edits directly to me and only to me. Do not reply all. And send those edits in track changes mode directly in the document if at all possible. And I would like those by the end of the day on Tuesday, October 3rd, next Tuesday. And that will allow me time to compile comments and any suggested edits and review those with attendees at the Housing and Neighborhoods Committee meeting on Thursday morning. So we'll put this slide back up at the end of the discussion. But now I think we can move into clarifying questions.
Okay, thank you, John, for the briefing, and always appreciate the time for us to look at the document. I also just want to appreciate the fact that you guys were able to pull together 2 comment letters and host 2 meetings during the same week to solicit input on what should go into those comment letters. So any feedback folks have today, I think, is acknowledging that you guys produced this under an extremely tight deadline and did a great job trying to synthesize and triangulate all of our input. So we'll start today with clarifying questions. And I'll go through the list. If you want to pass, you can go ahead and put your name, you can let me know in the chat box. And I think we are starting with Matt. Do you have clarifying questions?
No, I'll pass.
Okay. Jamie?
I'm still formulating my thoughts, so not yet.
Okay, I'll circle back to you. Deanna? Nope.
Also no questions, but comments.
And you're live presenter 20 today, right, Deanna? Is that correct?
Yes, I still need to figure out my technical issues. Apologies.
Okay. And David?
One thing, so we mentioned the 3 scenarios that I think are in the DEIS, but I don't know if they show up in the STP. I've read so much recently that I'm not sure what shows up where. But John, I'm wondering, do we need to say that that's from the DEIS, or is it somewhere in the STP and I'm not remembering it?
The 3 scenarios, as far as I know, are not in the draft STP. They're only a structural framework for review of in the DEIS. So they are addressed in our DEIS comment letter.
Yeah, they're mentioned in this letter. So I just think we just need to make sure we note that it's actually not in the STP. It's discussed in the DEIS, and something like that in the STP would make sense. Something like the whatever. Yeah, I guess the idea is we'll pick a scenario at the end of the DEIS process, but anyway, it's not reflected in the STP at the moment.
Maybe I do have a quick question.
Is that related to David's thought? Okay, go ahead.
So my question is more, Vanessa or John, do you all know if what the I can't remember right now, but what the plan is in terms of the sequencing of the updates once the comp plan gets developed? Is there an attempt to reconcile the STP? What is the sequence of the drafts and issuing? Do we know?
So the draft plan and the draft EIS will both be revised per comments received on the draft plan and the draft EIS. So the hope is that the draft comp plan will be out and comments will be shared in time for the draft plan to respond to comments received on the draft plan, as well as in the FEIS on the STP alphabet soup. that will name a preferred alternative. The
So does that
timing,
mean,
right?
does that mean that the timing between the final DEIS, maybe what is the amount of time that we anticipate will, more or less be available to kind of for the commission to maybe check the correspondences and the integration?
We talked about that with Radcliffe when he was here 2 weeks ago. We suggested that it would be helpful for us to provide feedback. We will obviously submit our DEIS comment letter.
Okay.
And then we will have an opportunity to review the final EIS.
Okay.
But the timing of all of this in relation to the comp plan is totally up in the air at this point.
Okay. Thank you.
Jamie, do you have any clarifying questions?
Yes, and sorry if this is kind of I might have just missed this when I was reading the plan, but on page 4, it says in multi-lane, it's the first bullet point under multi-lane arterials. It says where most crashes occur with strong anti-equity bias. What does that mean? What is anti-equity bias in regards to crashes?
I could point you to the commissioner that suggested that language, or I could try to answer it.
Can you try to answer it, and then maybe whoever suggests that can
My
chime in.
understanding is it's a reflection of crashes include a high percentage of crashes and pedestrian injuries involving people of color.
Okay, so it was not language that directly came from STP. That was commissioner suggested language.
Correct.
All right. I would suggest we change that because I read that and I have no idea what that means.
Yeah, I would say it would be better to say it the way John just said it, which is that a disproportionately high number of people of color, or whatever the exact thing is, are the ones that are killed and hurt.
Hey, I'm going to move us along to comments. We have a queue going. Vanessa, does Matt come first in the list of the queue? Are we going in order of people who put their hand up, or in order of the?
We're going in, I'm suggesting we're going in order of hand up, and I think
Okay.
I noted Andy, Nick, Deanna, Matt.
Okay, well, we're going to go with Andy first then. Andy, take us away.
Thank you. Two comments. One, and I was just trying to dig through the actual original document on cargo movement, and that is that electric cargo bikes can be used for last mile delivery of small packages. We actually do it on the UW campus. I see it's kind of mentioned in there. I don't know if there's a way to give a comment that says, further explore electric cargo bikes for last mile delivery of small packages. It's just something I think has a lot of potential for getting some trucks off the street when you're just delivering small things. So if there's a place for a sentence like that. The other comment is about regional coordination. The sentence that I saw said something like just encourage or commend the coordination that exists. I'd like to see a word like increase that coordination, and what that, I don't know what it is currently. Are they meeting every month or every week? But a real coordination might be, things like you get someone from one agency actually working with or part-time at both places, or something where they're really talking to each other very regularly. At CDC, what we did with EPA is we had an EPA assignee full-time at CDC who could then communicate back and forth between two agencies. And that's a lot stronger than just, we'll meet once a week and talk about any issue. So if there's any kind of wording, just say increase coordination, potentially by having part-time assignees from each agency and the other. This particularly for Metro and Sound Transit and SDOT.
Okay. Nick.
I had two kind of comments. One relates to the integration with the comprehensive plan section. I would maybe encourage stronger language regarding just some of the best transportation plans have the best land use plans. And so kind of leading with this really like, this isn't quite in the right order, but we're still gonna look forward to you updating that after we get a really great land use plan, or please continue coordinating with OPCD on that front, but being a little more forceful on just why it's so important that we're making that comment. And then another comment that I had that it just, as I was continuing to review the STP, I think I was noting the goals that they're providing. I think they provide those overarching goals on page 19, and then they go into kind of some detailed description about each of those goals that really answers the question as to the why we have those goals. But I wonder if the plan could benefit with a little more kind of pithy statement at the actual page 19, where they summarize all the goals. When they talk about mobility, for example, it's really because we want to guarantee mobility for everyone, and just kind of keeping these statements there. Even thinking about the equity, it's kind of acknowledging that public space and transportation investments have not been distributed fairly, and that's the why. And that's what they explain in detail, but I think it maybe is helpful to have SDOT highlight the why as it goes along with the goal, so that people can almost just look at those 2 pages and understand who's this for, why are we doing it, and what are we centering when we do that. And I have kind of suggestions for each one of those goals and key moves based on what they describe in each page. I can send that along if that's helpful, or if this group thinks that might be a good comment that we could raise.
Broadly speaking, I feel like that's the kind of fine tuning that this group is largely in support of, making the documents clearer, using more explicit language. And we generally trend towards taking squishy language and making it more explicit, kind of both to yours and Andy's point. So unless folks speak up otherwise, I think we're supportive of that. And staff really, really love when we put pen to paper and don't just say, can you fix this? But we give them a suggestion on how to do it. And it's so much better if you can do that early on in the process. So preferably by John's October 3rd deadline, because it gets harder and harder for us as a group to amend and kind of work through towards consensus later on in the process. So appreciate both your feedback and Andy's on language. And I did notice that they put the why statement in a lot of their policies, like the way that they crafted those were well done. And so I think it would just be sort of replicating the pattern that they have in the more specific parts up at the top, so the reader really understands from the get-go why, or what the outcome is supposed to be. All right, moving on to Deanna, are you back? Oh, no, we will, are you back now?
I am, but if you can allow me 1 minute,
Yeah,
someone else
sure.
can go and then I'll collect my thoughts.
Okay.
Thank you.
Matt.
Let's see, on page 5, when we talk about multi-lane arterials, I want to reiterate there that should be paired with how it integrates with the adjacent land use to forward the goals of the SDP and comp plan. All the bullet points have to do with what's happening in the right of way, and I want to make sure that they're thinking cohesively about what's happening adjacent to the right of way, because that's really, if we want these 15-minute neighborhoods, it's pairing what's happening in the right of way with what's happening on the private land. On page 6 under climate action, we don't mention tree canopy or like street trees, I think. And really there, I'd like to say that they should identify deficiencies in street tree canopy and have, and then in the online maps, have a sort of a layer for prioritizing street tree planting replacement. And then the third comment is just on the online maps, and this goes in the legibility section. They need more colors, or they need a better regimen of colors. If you are looking at the map and you see something that's orange, that could be an event street, it could be a multi-use trail, it could be a medium high injury risk arterial. So they need to either tag those or use line types in addition to line weight, in addition to color, to identify those things.
Thank you. Deanna, are you back?
I am, thank you.
Okay.
And first, John, just to confirm, right now we're just providing kind of comments, but really the intent is for us to provide and track changes, direct comments to you. Am I understanding that correctly in terms of process?
Yes, please. Especially we're running up against the time limit that we had allocated for this. So it's very beneficial for commissioners to put pen to paper, as Michaela mentioned, and send those edits directly to me by the end of the day, Tuesday.
Great. So instead of taking time right now, I'll go ahead and do that. My main comment is some of the suggestions that we're kind of making in terms of maybe it could look like this or that should be more clearly explained as, suggestions rather than maybe sometimes some of the tone appeared as we're telling them how to do it, and perhaps we're just offering one alternative or one way in which we believe the point we're trying to make can be communicated. So it's more of maybe a style comment in terms of the tone, but I just noted that in a couple of places that just in terms of an overarching comment, be a good filter to look through just to make sure we're providing it more as a general recommendation than then it's sounding like us telling them that that's exactly how we want them to do it. So I'll stop there.
Hey, any other comments? It looks like David passed. All right. Well, with that, please spend some time this weekend thinking about what you'd like to see changed in the letter, and get back to John by the end of the day on Tuesday, October 3rd. And I need to find my speaking notes to introduce the next agenda item, which is Olivia. So this next agenda item is the Seattle Planning Commission staff draft comment letter on the DEIS for the transportation plan. Olivia is going to walk us through the proposed comment letter. We're going to follow the same pattern we just followed, where we'll ask for clarifying questions first. And again, if you don't have questions, you can feel free to pass and I can circle back to you at the end. And then we will, following questions, open the floor to comments. Vanessa will continue to assist in monitoring the queue. We have 35 minutes for this agenda item, just like we did for the prior one. And again, today's discussion on the DEIS comment letter will inform revisions that we need to approve at the October 12th full commission meeting. All right, with that, I'll pass it over to Olivia.
Thanks, Michaela. And so similar to how John just did his presentation, I'm going to run through some slides, give you the high-level bullet points on our recommendations in the letter, and then I'll do a 5-minute review, and then we'll jump into our questions and comments. And I just sent out the letter through email, so you should be able to see that when you go to do your individual review time. And I'm just checking the chat. Okay. So to kick us off, just super high level, because I know we haven't talked about this at a full commission meeting yet, other than when we had Radcliffe join us to give us a high level overview of the DEIS. So for folks who aren't able to come to the executive committee meeting or the LUT meeting, just a few notes about the DEIS. This is a draft environmental impact statement for the Seattle Transportation Plan. So it's a non-project DEIS, which means it's much more of a high-level overview study than you would see on a project-specific DEIS. So the analysis is higher level, and the like mitigation strategies and such that are suggested are more high-level policy suggestions rather than specific actions. And the format of the DEIS has 3 alternatives. So there's the standard no action alternative. There's a moderate pace, which is just a sort of a tiny step above the no action. And then there's the more rapid progress option, which is basically fully implementing everything that's suggested in the STP as quickly as possible. And it covers the following environmental topics. So it covers air quality, water resources, sea level rise, transportation, noise, land use patterns, and utilities, and they're mostly focusing on electrical power there. So happy to answer questions for folks about the DEIS to the extent that I can, but I'm going to mostly focus now just on the letter. So the comment letter has just sort of a few sections. It's pretty simple. There's some opening comments. We have a section on positive feedback, things that we liked about the DEIS. And then it moves into areas for additional analysis, sort of broken out by overarching and then by element. And then it finishes up with some general comments about sort of the format of the document more broadly and the goal for the DEIS. So for positive feedback, the letter notes that we appreciate a discussion of adverse impacts of of the no action alternative. So basically noting that it's nice to see that there's some discussion of what will happen if the plan isn't implemented or if no action is taken. The letter notes an appreciation for the inclusion of the detailed overview of historical planning and transportation decisions section in the DEIS, which really looks at the impacts of planning decisions over time, sort of a timeline throughout Seattle's history up into more recent decisions. And so I think that's important context to have included in the DEIS. And then there's also a note that the DEIS is written in a nice, clear, easy to follow format with helpful supporting tables and graphics. So that was appreciated. Moving into the areas for additional analysis, just as a high level overall, there's a recommendation to include an additional overlay analysis for disproportionately impacted communities within sub areas that are studied within the DEIS, and have that be based on a race and social equity lens. So as the DEIS draft as it currently stands, there's very little discussion of race or social equity, which is not required in a SEPA analysis, but is something that the city can choose to do if they decide to. There's also a comment to study the impact of each alternative on affordability of travel for different modes. The letter notes that the SDP itself has multiple goals related to affordability, but affordability is not studied in the DEIS. Moving on to the more element-specific sections, looking at land use. There's a note to conduct additional analysis once a preferred alternative is selected for the comprehensive plan to fully align transportation investments with the city's growth strategy. So really just a connection there between our SDP letter and the DEIS letter. There's a suggestion to clarify how SDOT will align transportation investments with community-specific displacement mitigation strategies. And another note to conduct additional analysis to identify possible impacts of organizing dense multifamily housing and multimodal transportation next to major arterial streets. So again, a connection between that comment and the STP with concern around land use next to arterials. Looking at the transportation element, there's a comment to provide additional analysis of the benefits of prioritizing active travel and transit modes in the right-of-way. A recommendation to further explore the impacts of parking on the ability to implement each action alternative. And a recommendation to provide additional details of estimated changes in vehicle miles traveled for each alternative. Moving to the next section on climate change. There's a recommendation to study impacts on transit and active mobility users during extreme heat events and forest fire smoke events. and a recommendation to study the impact of pavement materials and other impervious surfaces on urban heat island effect, and to identify potential solutions such as alternative materials. And under air quality, there's a recommendation to study impacts to users when active travel modes and community and mobility hubs are placed alongside polluting travel modes such as highways and arterials. And then lastly, the letter sort of wraps up with some generalized comments about the draft document itself. There's a recommendation to pursue the most aggressive implementation of the Seattle Transportation Plan to avoid the SDP becoming a limiting factor in the growth strategy that is selected for the comprehensive plan. And then there's also a recommendation to include the definition of uncommon terms or terms that are used to describe major concepts in the draft STP. So for example, community and mobility hubs is a really common concept discussed in the STP. It's referenced in the DEIS, but it's not defined anywhere in the DEIS. So if you're not sort of knee deep in both documents, there might be some confusion. I think that was, yeah, that's my last slide. So I ran through those pretty quickly. Again, happy to answer any questions about those in our discussion. But first I wanted to give you all a chance to just read through, dive into anything that you saw or heard that was confusing. So hopefully that's in your inbox. And let's see, let's come back at 8:35. All right, that was 5 minutes, so hopefully it was enough time to get the gist of things. I'll pass it back, I guess, to Vanessa and Michaela to run our questions and discussion.
All right, so we'll start with clarifying questions. And Jamie, you are first up in the queue. Oh, you just passed. Andy.
Yeah, one question really for both the EIS and the plan. Is there anything on emergency response, emergency preparedness? Because it just seems that, so central to what the city needs to be ready for, that there should be some mention of coordination with emergency preparedness. Is there something in there? I just haven't read enough of it to find it.
So there are mentions in the DEIS of emergency response in terms of allowing room for like emergency vehicles, fire and rescue type things, but do you mean more like for a major disaster?
Yeah, when the earthquake brings down I-5, the city needs to have had some plans for how to handle it. And I think that ought to be somewhere in there that they are planning for, the big earthquake.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't recall seeing that, but I also wasn't really scanning for it, so I could take a look.
Okay, and if not, maybe a comment we could add that it needs at least to be addressed. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Deanna?
Just a quick question. From my understanding, and I would defer to our environmental experts on the commission, but an environmental impact statement its basic intent is to mainly identify if there are or aren't impacts of significance, but not necessarily shape or propose the actions or policies. It just evaluates de facto, a de facto proposal, and then what the environmental impacts of those things might be. So my question is, as I read some of the paragraphs, and it's an excellent letter, I do note that maybe we are making some recommendations around, analysis or comments that maybe belong not so much in the DEIS, but maybe in the STP. And I'm just wondering if it, how we're thinking about it, and just want to clarify kind of the intent of the comments for each instrument, right? The plan versus the DEIS. I don't know if that was clear. I guess my question is, is it the intent of our letter to give comments specifically about what the plan should be addressing, or is the focus of our letter to truly more provide comments on how the analysis of the environmental impacts might need to be provided? But I just kind of wanted to know if maybe I'm missing something by not being an environmental specialist in that regard.
Deanna, I think the latter. So if we can focus the draft EIS comment letter on the adequacy of the analysis and what additional analysis should be identified, as well as mitigation measures in the final EIS. I will also say that if there is some redundancy between the two letters, I think that is okay, because I'm not sure the same people will be reading each letter. And so at the risk of having some repetition, I would rather risk having some repetition between the two letters than have a really salient point lost.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay. Thank you.
Good.
Should I go?
Yes. Do you have a question?
Yeah, a couple small things. I don't think we have page numbers, but I think it's page 4. And in the third paragraph, we mentioned land use element. And at first that tripped me up because I thought, oh, are we talking about the comp plan here? But I think we mean the land use analysis portion of the DEIS there. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, maybe we should use another word besides element. Maybe only we are the only people who will think comp plan when we see that, but just want to make clear that. And then the next page, in the first bullet, what are the impacts of each alternative on travel times for various modes? I think this refers to comments we were really trying to call out. Are there travel time savings for transit in particular? But the non-personal vehicle modes, are the moves we're making those more timely and convenient? So I just maybe want to put a finer point on that particular bullet.
So to clarify, you'd like it to say non-personal vehicle modes or transit?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully this helps people, on transit, walking and biking, because if we have better biking connections, we'll have, more direct connections. And if we're favoring pedestrians, and signal timing and things like that, and routing, give pedestrians a better ways to get places with fewer delays. I would just like to, we'd like to see multimodal, I guess, analysis of travel times. We're not so worried about cars, I guess is the point, because traditionally that's been the measure, the level of service and the delay to vehicles. So anyway, I just would like to make a finer point. Even if we just make it transit, I think that would get closer to what we were saying in our comments.
Sounds good.
That's all I had.
All right. Does anybody have any lingering clarifying questions? Then with that, we'll move on to comments. If you have a comment, put your name in the queue. We've got 2 folks in the queue so far, Jamie and then Nick's next. So Jamie, go ahead.
Woohoo, comment time. Okay. I just wanted to, I have a couple of things. One, I'm really thankful for the recommendations around the sub areas based on race and social justice equity lens. That first one, I think it's highlighting some important inequities that get hidden and based on the way that the analysis currently is. So appreciate that. Also really appreciate the affordability comment. I feel like we often talk about affordability and then we don't actually study it. So I really appreciate that. A couple of things to kind of tweak a little bit that I would appreciate is there's the section on, well, first it'd be great to have page numbers because I've already lost where I was. When it comes to extreme heat, I would be cautious about, it seems like sometimes we're saying urban heat and then we're referring to both extreme heat and urban heat island effect. And it's important to note that like urban heat island effect is what happens when certain areas of the city are warmer because of the built environment during an extreme heat wave. And so, or just any sort of high heat event, right? And so I think we should just be specific about when we mean which thing. And currently right now under the study impacts for active and mobility users during extreme heat events, I think one of the things to note here with extreme heat is not just who's waiting for those stops, but literally can our transit still operate fully during that time? Because as we see hotter and hotter days in the summer, there is a possibility that there are times when we can't run things because it's just simply too hot and our infrastructure breaks down. So for example, at SeaTac Airport, they couldn't have planes land at one point because the runway was too hot for the tires. And so there are things like that I think it's we should say it's also about the infrastructure and whether or not we're going to be resilient to that. The other piece was around now I can't find it, but I remember what it was, which was the there it is. Multifamily housing along major arterials. And I've been a big advocate on addressing some of these concerns since I've started on the commission. And I think that we're a bit remiss here to not mention not just air quality, but specifically like air quality and health impacts of this. I feel like that can just be strengthened a little bit, because we know that if you live within 300 to 500 feet of a major arterial, your asthma risk goes up, your cardiovascular disease goes up, like all of that is higher risk. So I just feel like we should emphasize that. That's something we as a commission have been pushing for many years. And then re-emphasizing that again when we get to the air quality recommendation section at the bottom, because that's just talking about travel modes. But I also think this is about all of the things that are going into this. So our infrastructure, where we're planning for both transit and for traffic, and being able to to highlight that in both sections. So.
Okay, Nick.
So as a potential area for additional analysis, I am noticing in the draft EIS there is language about advocating for new funding methods. We also understand the timing of this relates to the transportation levy. There's some at least acknowledgement of what infrastructure is already funded, but I would be curious if it's worthwhile getting some sort of what's a rough cost of the full build out, or how do you account for kind of the cost escalations, and then what's the gap, so that when we're looking to advocate for new funding sources, we at least have some idea of what is that amount that we're trying to plan for, what's kind of the dollar amount that it's going to take to really roll out a plan. So I don't know if the EIS is the right kind of vehicle to complete that analysis, but it might help at least in supporting the STP as just a thought, and maybe a question to staff if you feel like that's something of value, or the commission if that's something of value.
I'm wondering if that fits best as a recommendation in the STP letter, as either to include in the STP or as like a companion study with the STP, basically a feasibility study. But that's just my initial thought. I don't know if others have thoughts.
I think financial analysis in terms of understanding gaps is always critical and helpful. My only question is, does it muddy the waters with the Move Seattle levy? Like in terms of timing and sequencing of that analysis, when does it make sense to do that? And would be open to some thoughts and staff expertise and commissioners' thoughts on how to formulate that recommendation and timing wise. But I think we should put something in there about it. Okay. Seeing as there's no other comments on that, we are going to move on to Deanna.
Oh, well, since I was next, that's why I didn't comment on what you said, but I'll have something to comment on that. I think my overarching comment, and I think we're daylighting in terms of the kinds of comments we're all coming up with right now, that there may be merit that as a commission, and I know it's just the amount of time is just the challenge, of course, but I do think that there were excellent comments in the DEIS draft letter that we didn't comment on in the STP that are relevant to be included in the STP. So I'm wondering that to Vanessa's point earlier of let's make sure we're honing in, in both letters, the key messages we want. I want to make sure we're not remiss in mentioning, some of like the parking comments in the DEIS letter makes it a little bit clearer what is it that we're asking about parking that we're missing in the STP. And so perhaps aligning kind of those key messages between both letters for extreme consistency might be worthwhile as a group. And then in that regard, which we kind of talk about it in our STP letter, in terms of like, we want to understand, are we going to be investing at the pace of growth, right? And do we have the funds for it? And it being a challenging, and, I've been in the public sector responsible for these kinds of plans. I know the challenge of trying to put on paper, basically a commitment where it is quite a bit of an effort to have like a rough estimate of cost. But I do think that then the solution to that is to create a commitment in the plan that as soon as the levy, exercise begins or is developed, that one of the, there should be an annual exercise to assess, available budget, funding gaps, and rate of infrastructure provision and investment. Like, what is going to be the accountability measure and the way in which we're going to be basically ground truthing the advancement of the plan vis-a-vis the plan, right? And so that is where I think is our opportunity to create a mechanism and a process for routine accountability, understanding that, it is impossible to commit, millions and millions of dollars, and the budget exercise is always a very challenging tension between priorities. So having said that, I think the recommendation should be in both letters that there's, that there should be a commitment and an acknowledgement of how the spending, the infrastructure growth will be tracked, and why in our STP letter recommendation of like, can we see at least the, what the network target, and target making it loose, but it's like, we're in baseline conditions. What does it look like in 5? That's our target. What does it look like in 10 years? What's our target in 20 years? Allows us to at least have bookends. I think what we need to recommend is a bookend analysis to really understand where is the tipping point of when we're not going to meet and we're going to see impacts if that doesn't happen.
Thank you. I think that's a pretty substantial recommendation and a really thoughtful one. I wanted to see how other commissioners feel about that for inclusion. Nick, starting with maybe Nick, does that kind of meet your concern?
I think so. I think it helps with the accountability and the transparency, kind of to have those kind of figures. So I would be supportive with the approach that Deanna is recommending there.
Okay.
Thanks.
And I'm just going to pause here and let folks who want to chime in on that unmute themselves and weigh in. All right. Well, I fully support that. I think one of the things that we talked a lot about in the meetings that I don't think you were there for is concern that implementation, it's all going to fall apart when there's tensions, and it's difficult to figure out whose input you're prioritizing and kind of what you're centering in your decision making. And so I think being clear about kind of progress goals is just yet another way for there to be transparency around how we're progressing towards plan implementation 5 years in, 10 years in, 15 years in. But I'm also all for annual updating if that's something that SDOT can staff and maintain, because budgets are dynamic.
I think that's a reasonable request. I think any department should be able to more or less have a straightforward way to report annually progress. So I don't think that's a disproportionate request to expect. So, I mean, I know I led a transportation planning department in a very large city, and that was expected of me and was able, and, I know it is possible and there's ways to do it. So I think we should request it. But I think mainly is when we're saying like the progress, I think what the DEIS could really help establish is what is the minimum? It is not clear to me that how many kilometers of what near what kind of density of trip generators, right? And giving options to those, like, do we then fall short of, like, would the impacts of significance materialize?
Yeah.
It's a very difficult question. Like, I know we're asking very tough questions that to be answered in a very pragmatic way, but I think therefore, without asking it to be done, the accountability mechanism needs to be there, and it doesn't belong in the DEIS, it belongs in the STP.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to call on myself. We have 4 minutes left. I'll keep my comments short. I appreciate the formatting in this comment letter where it's really clear that we can see the recommendation and then kind of the associated backup information and supporting evidence. And I think that would benefit us in terms of making sure there's a through line between comments in the DEIS letter and the comments in the SDP, and making sure that they're mutually reinforcing if we used a similar structure. And so would love to see recommendations pulled out more explicitly in the STP comment letter to sort of mirror this. And would also support Deanna's suggestion of making sure we're not missing opportunities in the STP to sort of reinforce points we're trying to make about what should be in the plan itself in the DEIS. All right, Andy, you get the last word.
One sentence, agree with the 2 documents should be reinforcing, and I think that the STP direct letter is more influential than the EIS letter, which is kind of one step removed from making changes. So the really important one is the STP letter.
With that, I think this concludes this agenda item. Olivia, do we have the same deadline for comments? Same deadline of October 3rd, end of day to you?
Yes, please. So the deadline's on the screen. You can apply to both John's letter and mine. And please similarly send your comments to me directly on the DEIS, not just to the whole group. Hopefully by the end of the day, October 3rd, you can get any extra comments you have together to both of us. We will be putting those into essentially final drafts to talk about at the October 5th H&N meeting. That's sort of the last chance to call out anything you want to see changed, because the intention is to approve at the October 12th full commission meeting, and that will really just be a short item to approve the letters.
Okay. All right,
Michaela,
Vanessa. Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just would like to put in a plug for any of you who can participate in next week's H&N. That's going to be a really important committee meeting because Olivia and John are going to be working diligently to take all the individual comments that you send each of them respectively, and there's the possibility that there could be either redundancy in the comments or that comments may not be in complete alignment. So next week's H&N committee meeting on Thursday is really the opportunity to workshop as a group the final letter. And for those newer commissioners, on the 12th of October, at that full commission meeting, when you all approve your letter, that is not the time to add a comment along the lines of, this language needs to be strengthened, or I'd like to see this emphasized more. The kind of edits that can be entertained at the October 12th meeting are specific language that we will endeavor to actually put up on the screen. So if you have an additional sentence you'd like to put in, or you'd like to change a sentence, you'll read that out, we'll type it up, look it up on the screen, and then as a commission, you will all accept that amendment or not. It's not, we really need to, you all need to approve the letter on the 12th of October in order to meet the comment deadline. And we want to make sure that it's reflective of all of your comments and observations and not leaving it up to staff to kind of figure out what does emphasize mean and what does strengthen mean. So I will be putting together kind of a one-pager on how we do the practice of the commission in approving letters and sending that out just as a reminder and as new information for our newer commissioners.
All right. And Vanessa, do we have any public comment at the end of the meeting today?
We do not.
We do not. All right. With that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting, and we will hopefully see lots of you next week at the H&N meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.